what are some things from a mentor's perspective, what are some things that I know now that I wish I knew when I started FTC? Um, so I expected FTC to be a little bit like my FRC experience. I was an FRC mentor before I was an FTC mentor. Um, and the FRC team that I was with was much larger. It had much more resources. Our FTC team, because we're not school-based, is a smaller team. So we only have 4 or 5 students, 2 or 3 mentors, so not as many resources. With that, time management becomes a big deal because each of our mentors has to wear multiple hats, whether it's build, programming, social media, helping with the notebook, um, whatever it is. So you really need to, especially if you're a small team with just a couple of mentors that are going to have to do everything, you really need to try to get out in front of that and use the resources that are available to you. The first forums, there's a lot of video material on the FTC YouTube channel. Um, Actobotics actually has some great build resources down to individual parts, as well as now, the First Thing First series, where they're taking a chassis and building up a chassis one at a time. So if you don't have a lot of mechanical experience, that would be great. Our YouTube channel for Redfish Robotics has a lot of resources on there, including the live stream that we did after last year's kickoff. The entire live stream is archived on YouTube. It's about 5 hours long, where the team builds an entire working robot in 5 hours using only the Actobotics kit of parts. So that's a really good resource for a team that might have no build experience at all. What advice would I give a team just starting out? From a mentor's perspective, um, don't be afraid to reach out to the first community. There are a lot of resources out there that sadly we see a lot of starting teams not take advantage of. There are literally tens of thousands of videos on YouTube produced by other FTC teams. Um, there are tons of posts in the FTC online forum going back multiple seasons that talk about all the control systems, all the servo things. That's the FTC forums are also the only official place that you can get advice or ask questions about this year's game. If there's a rule that you don't understand, or one of your students comes to you and says, and I know this has happened to me. A student comes to me and says, "Can we do this?" And it's somehow outside of the box. I mean, the general rule of thumb is that if it's not explicitly disallowed, that it's usually legal. But when you're dealing with young people and telling them to use their imagination, uh, that was my notes drifting past. You get some pretty interesting questions, and as a beginning coach, you don't always know if they're legal. So use the resources that are available to you. And my number 2 thing would certainly be time management. Time management is challenging. Everything takes longer than you think it should, especially if you're learning a lot of it from videos, because the videos are made by people that are experienced and have done this before. So they tend to make things look simpler than they might be. And most of what we do isn't terribly complicated, but it can be pretty time consuming if you're trying to do precise things. What I always tell my team is fail fast. I'm sure in some of the other videos you'll hear team members mention that. And what we mean by that is, we want the students to experiment, to try new things. Many of those things aren't going to work, but getting that process going, sometimes you trip over things. You find things by accident that are like, oh, this didn't work, but maybe if we just mounted this part slightly differently, or maybe if we turned the servo upside down to get it to move the other way. So So time management and reach out and use the resources that are available. What are some of our team's favorite Actobotics parts? So I like visual aids, so I brought some. Um, Certainly these servo blocks, they come in a kit. This is on a full-size servo and a quarter-scale servo. Most of you will probably use these more than anything else. We took the frame off the outside of this one, so you can see that this horn sits on the servo, and there's a bearing inside here that actually holds all of the weight. So if you have an attachment on the outside of this, like it was a beam or something like this, that's moving up and down to manipulate something, all of the weight that would normally be on your servo spleen, that's the part that the screw goes into. Some of them are plastic, so they're susceptible to breaking. All of that weight is now on the bearing that's inside of this frame, goes onto this whole piece, and then this same Actobotics rosette pattern that you see on all of the Actobotics pieces are all modular. So you can attach there, you can attach there, you can put a piece across the top and attach to that. Last year's robot, the team did well, went to Supers, went to the World Championship for the first time. That robot had at least 4 servo blocks on it, and then all of their spare servos actually sit in the toolbox. These are actually spares that sit in the toolbox with the block on them, so that if something happens to the servos, because they're mechanical things, they break sometimes, we put a lot of strain on them, they're already sitting in the servo block. So however this was mounted to the robot, if there's just 2 or 4 screws that went onto the frame, rather than putting this whole thing together, they just pull those screws out, put that on, plug this back in. No difference in the programming. No difference in. Obviously, you'd have to align whatever position the horn needed to be in, but pretty quick. Our team's gotten to the point that we can change servos in between 15 or 20 minutes that you have in between a match. And my other favorite is these tiny little plastic wire grommet pieces. Anybody that participated a couple years ago or heard stories about it, we had lots of problems with static electricity, with wiring grounding out to the frame. So these little grommets fit into any of the half-inch holes anywhere that you see in the Actobotics system. They're pretty much everywhere. They just snap in, and then you can take something then, like your servo wire, and just pass your servo wire right through there, and not have to worry about that ever grounding through the frame. So you could do something like put that through one side, have it come out the other side like that. You could do that with your whole frame. Our robots are generally an 18-inch square, so if you had a wire that had to go all the way from one side, your control center was on the other side, you're going through a lot of places. These are great. We probably had at least 50 of them on the robot last year in different places. So those are great. And another thing about those individual components is that nearly everything that Servo City sells in the Actobotics line has the CAD drawings with it. So if you need measurements or anything like that, or if you're starting to get into CAD and you want to start teaching your kids how to fit pieces together into assemblies, it's great that all of those drawings are available for free, and you can put them into a basic drawing, or even just open up the drawings on the website to see what the measurements are, to see if they're going to fit into your plans. What are some struggles our team experienced in the past? Being a community-based team without a school affiliation, we're sometimes a little challenged on resources. Not that schools necessarily have a lot of money to help robotics teams with funding, but without having a connection to your community, it can be a challenge to come up with that funding at all. especially when you're starting out, because a large part of your expenses are on the front end. The first time you buy a kit, motors, the first time you buy your control system, tools, field, your field frame if you're going to get one of those. A lot of those things are front ends. Then from year to year, it doesn't necessarily have to be as expensive as having all those front things. So I would say for a community-based team, from coming from that perspective, you really need to get yourself out there. There are lots of events, little maker fairs, and STEM's a big deal now. So community colleges and universities are hosting STEM days. Here we participate in the Girl Scouts Believe in Girls event. They call that the big event every year, where 1,000 Girl Scouts from Southeast Louisiana come together for one big day, and all the levels of first are represented there. Community days, parades, even doing your own demos, maybe at the local library. So getting yourself out there in the community so that people know you're there. Our experience has been, whether it was our local hospital, we have a Textron plant nearby, we have Dow and energy plants nearby. Multiple teams in Louisiana got grants last year from CLECO, which is the energy cooperative area that we live in here. But they need to know you're out there, and they need to hear the story, especially from your students, of how they've benefited from the FIRST programs, how excited they are about being able to do these things, and even if it's finding more students and more mentors. If you're a small team, especially in maybe a suburban or rural area, what kids don't like to play with robots, right? But nobody thinks that the people next door have a 12-foot practice field in their garage like we do. So letting people know that you're present and telling them the story of FIRST can really be helpful with finding resources.